Hi everyone, this is Sienna and today I'll be painting this nest filled with colorful pastel eggs, which I thought would be something fun to do for Easter, which is coming up. The drawing is fairly simple, however I did leave that portion out of this video, but I'll have the outline available in my coffee shop in case any of you are interested. So let's begin by going over the colors I'll be using. Firstly, this is Terre Verde, Sepia, Buff Titanium. This is a custom pink that I made and I'll show you the mixture in the description box. Permanent Yellow Deep, Cobalt Green, Mineral Violet, Burnt Sienna, Yellow Ochre, and Olive Green. These additional items are optional, but I'll also be using Bleed Proof White by Dr. Paige Martens and a Sakura Micron pen 0.1 in Sepia. So here's the outline that I've drawn out. What I like to do is to just tap my eraser around to lighten the lines because we are going to be using fairly light colors. So I want to make sure that the pencil outline is light enough so that it won't distract the painting. For the first egg in the middle, I'm going to begin by using a light consistency of Cobalt Green to just cover the base color. Next, I'm going to use a light consistency of pink and do the same thing for this egg right here. You can use different base colors for your egg as well. These are just the colors that I like as a combination, but if you have your own color mixtures or specific hues that you'd like to add on, you can also customize this painting. For the next one, I want a yellow hue, but I don't want the yellow to be too strong, so I mix in a little bit of Buff Titanium to the Permanent Yellow Deep. The next color that I'll be using is Mineral Violet. This color is fairly dark, which is why I'm using a very light consistency to make sure that the color look a bit more pastel. For the next two eggs, I'm going to use Buff Titanium as the base. I like how neutral this color is, which is why I'm going to color in a couple of eggs with this color. Since we've used up all the hues here, I'm going to create my own color now. I'm going to mix in a little bit of Permanent Yellow Deep to the Cobalt Green to make more of a neutral green color. And for the next one, I'm going to create an orange by mixing in pink with Permanent Yellow Deep. For the next one, I'm going to mix in Buff Titanium to the orange, and this will just create more of a creamy color that is less vibrant. For the next one, this is a fun color to make. I mixed in Cobalt Green with Mineral Violet to create this muted blue color. The next thing I want to do here is to build the form by adding the darker values of the egg. So for this, I'm just going to add sepia to all of the hues. And for the first one, I added sepia to pink and I used a medium to thin consistency around the edges. Then I softened the edges with a clean damp brush. For this next egg, I still have the same mixture, so I added sepia to the same color mixture as this egg, and I'm going to do the same thing by just painting it around the edges and then softening the color to get a softer transition. Next, I'm going to add sepia to the Mineral Violet. For this one, I used a really light consistency and I added more of Mineral Violet compared to the sepia because the color itself is fairly dark already. So I want to make sure that I don't muddy the color too much by adding too much sepia to all of the hues. For the next one, I'm going to build the form on the yellow, but for this, because the sepia is very muted, it can turn out a bit greenish and it's a bit too dull for my liking. So for this one, I added a little bit of burnt sienna to warm up the color. And after this, I'm just going to do the same thing for the green egg and the blue egg as well. For the buff titanium eggs, I'm going to treat it the same way as what I did with the yellow egg, and this is to add a little bit of burnt sienna to the sepia. And I also thought about adding a little bit of reflective color from the cobalt green egg in the middle, which is why I added a little bit of cobalt green underneath. I really like having the reflective color on the other egg, so I tried to do this all across to make it consistent. I added a little bit of the cobalt green to the pink egg, and I also used a little bit of mineral violet and the permanent yellow deep on the large egg in the middle, while still trying to build up the value and the form of the egg using a little bit of sepia mixed into the cobalt green. Now I'm just going to keep on working on the eggs by slowly building up the saturation of the color so it's vibrant enough to my liking, and also to build the form by adding the shadow colors. And I also want to add the reflective color just like before throughout most of the eggs, and I just feel like this brings a bit more life into the painting. Since I've been working all around the eggs, the paper is fairly damp and it won't really take any more colors if I try to layer on more. So I'm just going to quickly dry it off so I can add on more layers to define the shape and the vibrancy of the painting. I'm doing this by layering the colors very lightly so I don't overwork and darken the soft pastel colors that I'm looking for in this painting. So here you'll see me going back and forth to certain eggs and then moving around to different ones while I wait for the paint to settle and dry, and then painting on it again until I'm satisfied with how the form and the color is looking. Here's where I realized that I forgot to also paint on the shadows on the orange egg. So I'm doing this by using burnt sienna and sepia again to not make it too dull. And I also added a little bit of the cobalt green as the reflective color. You'll see that the yellow egg is starting to look a bit muddy, so I'm going to take a bit more of the permanent yellow deep to brighten up the egg again. This is what you can do to all of the eggs. If it starts looking a bit muddy, since the color is still painted on very lightly, you can just take on the original hue and add on a light glaze. I think there's a fairly good definition on the eggs now, so I'm going to move on to paint the nest. For the nest, I'm going to use a mixture of sepia with burnt sienna, and I'm just going to fill in the little gaps in between the eggs. I want to make sure that the edges are fairly clean so it doesn't distort the shape of the egg, and I also want the color to be a little bit darker closer to the gaps. Here I'm going over it again with a thicker consistency and a bit more sepia in the mixture, and I really try to get close to the edge of the eggs so the eggs can also have a cleaner outline. If the tip of your brush is a little bit frayed, it might be difficult to get to the very tiny corners, so you can also switch to a smaller brush for this if it's easier for you to control. As I get towards the edge, I want to lighten the color slightly, so I added a little bit of yellow ochre into the brown mixture, and this is also where I start to add the nest texture by leaving out little negative spaces while painting on uneven lines. I like to also layer on a darker color so a little bit of the lighter color shows through as the base, and I'm just going to keep on doing this all around the eggs. For the outer edges, I'm going to use the lighter brown with more yellow ochre in the mix, and I'm just going to paint on the texture of the nest with a thin consistency while leaving out a little bit of white negative space. I'm going to do this a little at a time so I can start to also build on the layers little by little. The strokes that I'm painting here are quite thick, and I'm only leaving out a little bit of white negative space because as we build on the layers later on, I'm going to make the strokes a little bit thinner so you can see more depth in the coiling of the nest. As the paint dries, I can see that I need to build on the values for the nest underneath the eggs, so I'm just going to layer on a darker mixture with more sepia and in a thicker consistency. I'm going to paint some loose twigs or branches on top of the eggs close to the edges. This just makes the composition look a bit more natural as the twigs are not perfectly even and neat. After that, I'm just going to continue on painting the outer edges of the nest, and I'm also going to add on more of the loose twigs or branches around the outer part of the nest as well. For the loose branches, though I'm using the same mixture with a lot of yellow ochre, I'm using a very thick consistency in comparison to the medium to light consistency for the main nest because I want these loose branches to be quite defined. I'm only using one brush for this painting, which is why I'm using the very tip of my brush to create the fine branches, but you can also switch to a size-zero brush or any fine brush you have. I'm going to add on the second layer for the nest now, so I added burnt sienna into the previous mixture and I'm using a medium to thin consistency to create more of the nest texture, but this time I'm trying to create thinner strokes so you can still see the light color underneath. After I've built on the second layer for the outer edges, now the nest look a bit darker overall, so I want to increase the contrast in value by layering on more of the darker color for the nest closer to the center, especially around the transition where the nest is curling upwards into a bowl. Since I'm using a darker color, I'm also using thinner brush strokes so the branches doesn't look too bulky. After I've painted the nest, now I can see that the eggs are popping out because the color isn't consistent enough and it's not interacting with each other. So what I want to do is get a little bit of the nest color and use a thin consistency of it to add on to the shadows, and this will just add a little bit of warmth to the eggs and connect it with the rest of the surrounding environment. Just like before though, this is all about balance, and if you feel like you need to add more of the hue, you can go ahead and do that as well. So try to just balance out the painting so it looks cohesive with each other. When I add on the browns, I try to do a bit less sepia in the mix because, like I mentioned before, having too much sepia can make the color look a little bit muddy, but I do like the depth or the value that it creates. So for this, I try to add a bit more burnt sienna or a little bit more yellow ochre for the shadows of the eggs. The next thing I want to do is to create spots for the eggshells. And for this, I'm going to use the exact same shadow color, which is sepia mixed with the same hue of whatever the egg is. And this time I use a bit more sepia in the mix and also a slightly thicker consistency, so the spots can be a bit more visible. You can, however, mix this up if you want to use a bit more of your hue as well. You can try to do that, and you can create any types of variation you'd like to. Personally, I like to create larger spots and also tiny dots as well, and I like to randomize the placement and not make it too even all around so it looks nice and natural. Sometimes the dots or the spots can be in a thinner consistency, and you can build it up with a slightly thicker consistency on top, and this will just give you layers in the spots, so some of it looks a bit more faded. And I'm just going to keep on repeating this for the rest of the eggs. Some eggs can have more spots than the others as well, and you can also leave some completely blank if you would like to, or even add any other design. This painting is highly customizable and it's completely up to you. The next thing that I want to do here, which is optional, is to add on leaves to the branches. And for this, because I've painted the branches brown, I'm just going to go in with a thick consistency of bleed-proof white and start painting tiny leaves. And this is just going to create a white base for me to paint on with my watercolors on top. So after I've created the white base, I'm just going to create a green by mixing Terre Verte with permanent yellow deep, and I'm going to fill in those white areas. After this, I'm also going to follow it up with a slightly darker green using a thick consistency of olive green to just put it around the sides and add a little bit of shadow so the leaves doesn't look too flat in comparison to the rest of the painting. I am also going to add tiny leaves for the loose branches in the outer area of the nest as well, and I'm just using the tip of my brush to paint them on, but again, you can switch to a smaller brush for this. Here, I'm just going to go back in with a little bit of sepia to just darken certain areas and to define more of the leaves. I'm also going to add darker branches to break up certain areas which might look a bit too bulky. I think I should have stopped the painting here, but I wanted to try something. I added larger leaves on both sides because I felt like it'll be nice to have that variation of larger leaves. And I also used my pen to define it, which I felt made it look a little bit too cartoony compared to the rest of the painting. So you can go ahead and skip that part if you don't like it. I personally prefer it without, but it's completely up to you. And after that, if you're turning this into a card, you can just go ahead and write Happy Easter at the bottom. So that's it for this painting. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Like usual, all the list of tools as well as my social media links will be listed in my description box. I'll also have the outline available in my coffee shop. Happy painting to all of you. If you guys are still here, thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye!